And this is the only way I could think of affording them at this point, because Pyradyne was just starting at that time. So I ended up trading some lasers and bringing them home. And believe it or not, the very first laser that was ever taken out of there for, new age application is in my living room right now. And I would point the camera at it, but the camera doesn't seem to be working tonight. I'm going to have to tune it up. I wanted to have the camera on tonight, but it didn't seem to work, the one that you see on BBS radio. So I'm going to have that fixed. Something went wrong with it. That laser is on right now, and it was originally turned on about 30 years ago. It hasn't been turned off other than power surges, but basically it's been running for 30 years. It's their original laser that was used for this. And that particular laser, we used to take it out and shoot it into crystals and show it to people at different health shows that we did. This was back in the early 70s we were doing this. So that started to catch on. People would look at the laser beam, and they'd see it going into the crystal. And when it went into the crystal, they would see this big haze come over the crystal, and it would engulf their consciousness. And if you start to realize that the crystal is a perfect synthesis of spirit and matter in zero time, and that the quartz kingdom is the birthplace of the Akashic records. So what we were doing, but we were a little unconscious to it, is we were actually unleashing the Akashic records off the astral plane down onto the physical plane by the use of the laser. Well, how does the laser do that? People would ask me. Here's how it works. Okay, a photon is coming from the astral plane. Okay, that's where photons live. If you were to astral project up into the astral plane, you would find that it's a self-illuminating place. The world there is self-illuminating. Self-illuminating means you don't need a sun to lighten something up. You don't need to have an outside source of light to reflect itself in different characteristics, therefore calling bandwidths, giving color. You just don't, or wavelengths rather, giving color. You don't need to do that. So the astral plane is great, but that's not where we are here. We're on the physical plane. The astral plane is somewhere where we go, and we're not in a physical body. So what happens is, in this stimulation of emission of light from the white light source, where the laser tube, we'll just keep going with the ruby here, where the rod actually starts oscillating all down its perimeter, down its axis at the same frequency, absorbing all that energy from the white light, which is green, but then yet producing a red light. In any colored laser, regardless of what color output it is, it always absorbs from white light the green energy, which was an interesting phenomenon. The next thing that would happen is, we're talking about a flash, like a photo flash on a tube, which suddenly stimulates it into producing light. Well, where does this light come from? And we don't have an incandescent light here, which is incandescent light is random light, which you can't use it for much other than random illumination. Can't pull a rainbow out of it, for example, if you reflect it in through a prism. The coherent light that we're talking about comes from the astral plane. The photon is a unit of energy that's self-illuminating from the astral plane. So if you apply a laser to a crystal, what happens is you're illuminating the crystal into the astral plane. So you're taking it from the etheric plane where it normally operates, which is actually a lower plane. You're illuminating up on the astral plane, but at the same time it causes the body to absorb wavelengths subtly of light, and you probably have a much higher assimilation of the intelligence in a crystal by illuminating with a laser had you just be looking at the crystal without any laser light. So that was the very beginning. It caught on very well, and pretty soon we were selling lasers and crystals all over this planet. We were the very first to do that. So we became the number 3 people to, along with Ivan Ponadel and Fred Lord and myself, we became the 3rd person, Pyradyne did, to take lasers to a new level. As a result of this, I built up a huge relationship with Mel's Griot, and as the prices went down on the red lasers were once upon a time $1,000 for a 5 milliwatt laser, and in the end they were probably $50. Then the green laser came along. The green laser came along as a modification of the helium neon red with special filters and optics, and so we were able to introduce the green laser out there. So up until this point in our systems, we were the only people in New Age anywhere to introduce red and green lasers in the entire planet. There's nobody else that did it because nobody else was doing it. A little later on, another company came along over in up in the Riverside area, and they came up with a helium-cadmium laser, and it was a violet laser, very expensive. And by the way, what these lasers were being used for commercially were Xerox machines. They were using them for color Xerox machines, and they were scanning these various colors, and they were getting their color to light-sensitive paper, and therefore you could see it as color paper at Xerox. So that's what these machines were being, lasers were being made for originally. We were the ones that took them out of a machine and decided to put them out in the public. The helium-cadmium laser was developed by a company called Omnichrome, and it was designed to make holograms, believe it or not. And the holograms, in the production of holograms commercially, they were to be used by putting a beam into a resin solution with a pattern on it from what's called a CAD pattern, a CAD program. So in other words, you could, let's say you're making your General Motors, you're designing a new distributor for your car. You need right away you need a prototype of a distributor cap, and so you design this on a computer and shine it onto the laser, put it into the laser, and it would project this image down into the solution, and it would harden by the helium-cadmium beam, and it would, a few hours later, you'd pull out a liquid or a plasticized part made out of a liquid with the use of helium-cadmium. That's where the business was going. We took it into the medication area, but the problem was that we couldn't get enough of these lasers. They were incredibly expensive. They were very unreliable. They broke easily. They were very delicate. So this is how it all started. Later on, and I realized at the same time that as we move around the Pleiades, every 26,827.5 years, we go into different consciousness levels, different eras of consciousness. And so as we move from the Piscean age into the Aquarian age, the 7 levels of consciousness, or 7 levels of feelings, start to compress on themselves. In other words, the mental plane starts to fall into the astral plane. The astral plane starts to fall into the physical plane. What this means is that people don't no longer have to be high-level sensitives as they were, say, at the turn of the century during Blavatsky's and Ledbetter's and the White Brotherhood days when the theosophical groups were all over this planet, professing all the metaphysical knowledge that they had at the time. And only a few were grasping it. Now everybody can grasp it, because where we are in the rotation of the precession of the equinox, everybody can actually grasp it. A lot of people aren't ready, but they're being exposed to it anyway. And of course, that means increased bandwidth within their consciousness. And that's why the race, believe it or not, is going towards more holistic foods, less towards meat and junk food, even though junk food's everywhere. There is a huge movement towards holistic living. It's growing. It's getting better. And these are the folks that will go into what's called immortality. Well, when you come up onto the doors of immortality, what happens is you start to see into the mental plane and feel into the astral plane without assistance from much of anything. However, the government, of the world, the governments of the world, especially the One World Order, is very aware of this transition. Believe me, they're not stupid. They have been there. They've been remote viewing and doing all kinds of crazy psi experiments. Russians were doing it back in the 50s. We're a little bit poo-pooed by the American governments. Now they're all trying to play catch-up with what Russia did 30 years ago. So they don't want the populace to have this information. They really don't. But the bottom line is, companies like Pyradyne producing the things that we do, bring out stuff to unblock their little blocks. In other words, they're blocking this growth. How do they block it? They're blocking it with satellites like Clementine, with ELF and HARP, and allowing chemicals in the food, allowing sprays in the aircraft engine exhaust like contrails. All of these things are little links, little blocks to block your ability to go into the hydrogen atom, which is the source of the photon, the source of consciousness, and get a clear reading, get confidence. That's what they're doing. The drug companies, of course, when you have all these blocks from all these things I'm mentioning going on,